I'm Kathryn Goldman Schuyler, and this is Exploring Leadership. In this series of conversations, I'll introduce you to leaders who dance with possibility, whose creativity, depth, and vision bring leadership to life. People from many arenas, business, the arts, government, whose lives add vitality and meaning to our planet. So I'm delighted to be here with both of you this morning. I'm Kathryn Goldman Schuyler. I've worked with the International Leadership Association as lead editor of several of their books in their Building Leadership Bridges series. So know the organization well, and I'm delighted to be here with my friend and colleague Subhanu Saxena, who will introduce himself in a moment, and Jacqueline Carter, who is co-founder of Potential Project, and she and Rasmus Hugard recently published their second book, which helped us get together to find out more about their work this morning.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. It's wonderful to be here.
Would you just tell us briefly something about you, and then we'll go more into it as we talk?
Well, I would be happy to. So as you said, I've had the privilege of being a part of Potential Project since for a number of years. And Potential Project, just for context, we are a global leading consulting and training organization that helps individuals and leaders and organizations enhance focus, creativity, and resilience through training the mind. We work with large organizations, Fortune 500, so Microsoft and Cisco and Accenture, just to name a few. My own background, I have a master's in organizational behavior, and I'm very passionate about helping organizations enhance performance and manage the stormy waters of change that many of us are facing today, and specifically doing that with being more calm, more clear, more focused in everything that we do, and really looking forward to our time together today.
Great.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So, hello, everybody. I'm Subhanu Saxena, and you could describe me as a practicing CEO. I've lived this life in the corporate world in a number of senior positions. I recently ran Cipla, one of India's largest companies, 25,000 people, and currently I'm a director at the Gates Foundation. I also, though, have this other part of my life. I had the privilege of training with Sanskrit masters from a Sanskrit-speaking village in India, Mattur, where I learned my ancient Vedic literature and Advaita philosophy, and have been a teacher for many years of mindfulness practices and Sanskrit Indian literature, and have spent a lot of time showing people that these two worlds don't need to be separate. And when one can figure out how to lead oneself with purpose, you can lead organization with purpose. And I think that's what drew Kathryn and myself to this discussion, Jacqueline. We learned about the book is to learn a bit more about you and the journey you've been on and what brought you to this this topic. And I thought way we could maybe start, Jacqueline, is in terms of giving some context for the work that you do, is to take me back to one of my CEO roles. It was quite amazing at Cipla, where we essentially had a mission given to us by Mahatma Gandhi to ensure none should be denied access to affordable medicines. And we really wanted to bring some of these practices to the organization. So we did indeed introduce appreciative inquiry to our manufacturing leaders, which they found an eye-opener. I remember visiting one of our plants up in Sikkim, and there was a 6:30 a.m. yoga session. So we kind of took some steps down this journey, but really wanted to just ask you and give you the chance to share a little bit about how you would support a CEO in that kind of environment in an organization to open it up and bring some of these practices in and to the next level. How would you enter that kind of organizational challenge opportunity and go about that? That would be great, just to kick things off and hear your thoughts on that.
What I love about what you said, and I think one of the things that we always look for in the organizations that we work with, is the first thing is there a motivation? Is there a driving reason why this is important? And certainly having a directive to be able to be of service to the larger community is certainly a very powerful one. And then what we really look for is to make it practical. So we know that within any organization, so there's got to be something that brings people together. And we know one of the things that's beautiful about human beings is that we, especially if it's a mission, like a purpose, that's something that we can all relate to. That really brings our hearts and minds together in terms of our work. But then we need to make it practical. So what does this actually look like? And what our specialization within Potential Project, what we have really seen is that, for example, if we brought in mindfulness just for mindfulness sake, it's nice, it's good. We know the practices are extremely beneficial, but we want to actually look at the way people are working. So we want to take it one step further and actually say, okay, well, beyond just, maybe the yoga or the mindfulness sessions in the morning, what is it about the day-to-day work life in the plant that would actually be helpful if people were more present, if people were more calm, if people were more clear-minded? Let's say when you're looking at the challenge that you're facing in terms of how to be of better service to your communities, what is it like when you're in a brainstorming meeting? Are your minds cluttered? Are there things that you can do in that moment to help you be more clear-minded? There's specific training practices that you can do to be able to generate more creative ideas. And so for us, it's not just the practices of mindfulness, of selflessness, of compassion, but it's the ability for us to work together to find ways to make it relevant and practical and tactical in your day-to-day work. And through that, what we actually see is then it actually starts to be embedded in work practices. It's not just, oh yeah, we're going to do this thing to clear our minds, then we're going to be in the busyness of everyday work. They're integrated. And with that, then we actually start to see that it becomes a new way of working. And then it actually becomes much easier and it becomes our natural default state. Does that make sense? You're nodding, so I'm assuming that makes sense. But does that answer your question in terms of our approach?
Yes, I guess what you're saying is how do you make it just authentic to the natural flow of work? And bring that realization to individuals as to what does it mean to be fully present in everything they're doing. Did I get that right?
Exactly. And what I would say is that too often, I think it's, if we separate these practices from our work life, it's like, for some people, I'll have a practice, but then I go into the daily busyness and I'm insane. I'm back-to-back meetings. I'm not taking breaks. My mind is cluttered. I'm not being the kind of leader that I want to be in terms of, bringing more kindness, bringing more caring into my day-to-day leadership. So we're missing the point of the practices. The practices are intended to help us to be able to bring these into everything that we do. And so that's really for us what's our, I think, sweet spot in terms of helping to be able to support organizations integrate it.
It's interesting that you say that for two reasons to me, Jacqueline, because before I moved to work in California, I was at a community college. And at one point I realized when I was kind of sitting there in my office one day that I wouldn't any longer hire me. And so I left the job by choice to move to do something else because I thought, what I loved and who I was when I took on this role was really excited and passionate. And I loved the people that I was working with and was interested in them. And at that point, instead, I realized I was noticing the things that didn't work. So I thought, time to either change this or move.
Right.
And for me, it was time to change it. So I think too often people don't take that step. So that, though, leads me to be even more interested in you. How did you get into this work? What's your journey been that's gotten you where you are? Because it's a very unique role. There are few women-led or co-led organizations. There are a few others, but few that do this kind of work.
Well, my journey, so my background, as I mentioned, organizational behavior and change. I have a master's in that. And I was with Deloitte Consulting for many years. I worked in the US and Canada and in Australia, helping large leading organizations manage major change projects, and really enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time during my period with Deloitte. But at the same time, I'm a long-term practitioner of mindfulness and had always found that for me, if I noticed if I didn't practice on a day, the difference between the days that I did practice versus the days that I didn't practice. And when I practiced, I was the kind of employee that I wanted to be. So I didn't want to fire myself, Kathryn, as you talked about, because I was more calm, I was more clear-minded, I was more focused, I was kinder to myself, I was able to set better boundaries, and I was more strategic. And so for me, it was actually critical to my success that I felt that using the practice as a tool to be able to help me be successful in a very busy and high pressure work environment. But I always kept it a secret because I was a female professional, as you've already identified, but at that time I was younger in my career, and I was worried about my own credibility. And just to give you an example, when I was in Australia, one of my clients was the Australian Department of Defense. And the last thing that I was going to tell a bunch of Aussie blokes with guns was that in my spare time, I like to sit on a cushion and count my breaths. Like, that was never going to come up in conversation because I just thought people would see me as being weird and flaky. And what happened to me was a number of years ago was that I was a program director for a multi-million-dollar program, actually at a university, and there was process change and system change and many of the things I think both of you are very familiar with in terms of corporate life. And my CFO, who was he was my client and he was a good friend of mine, he stood up in front of a group of 300 people and made a presentation about a change that we were launching that I had prepared him for. I had created the presentation, and he stood up in front of the group and he passed out. And the ambulances came and they, tried to figure out what was wrong with him, and they couldn't find anything wrong. And everybody was like, oh, I wonder what's wrong with Jake. But we all knew he was under pressure. He was not taking care of his body, and he wasn't taking care of his mind. And in that moment, I just felt so incredibly ashamed that I had these tools and techniques for training the mind that I had been too ashamed to, and too afraid basically to bring to the world. And so at that point, I made it my mission. I thought, well, if anybody's going to listen, and it's always so great to meet CEOs that are passionate about bringing these tools. When I started in this journey, there weren't many CEOs that were willing to listen to the benefits of bringing mind training tools into organizations. But I had the opportunity actually to move to Singapore. And I felt like if I was going to come out of the closet as a mindfulness practitioner, Singapore seemed like a great place to do it. And started, and that's when I met with Rasmus. And he had started the Potential Project already in Europe and was expanding out into Asia. And so we teamed up, and since then it's been a really amazing journey. And we've learned a lot in our early days. How to make this skillful means is one of our key mantras, is how do we be skillful in bringing these practices because they're beneficial to people. And how to make it so that it doesn't feel weird to sit in silence, that it doesn't feel weird to slow down, to speed up. And that's really been our passion. And I just have to say that we've learned so much from so many of our amazing clients that have helped us along the way and really being partners to us in this journey of how to be skillful of bringing these tools and practices into day-to-day work life. So,
what was your very first exposure? Did you stumble into a yoga class or a meditation class, or you read something, or you saw a movie? What was that first inspiration?
Yeah, my first inspiration was actually when I was 14 years old, and I was fortunate enough to be in a high school where they had a world religion course. And I was exposed to Buddhism, actually. And that was my first, I have a background in math and physics. I did my undergrad from a scientific perspective. And for me, there was one line in one of the texts that I read was basically using your own mind as a science experiment, as your own study. And I thought, well, that's like the coolest thing ever. Why wouldn't we all want to use our own mind as an opportunity for us to study and understand how we think? Understand that we can actually choose what we think sometimes, that we can choose to manage our thoughts in different ways to be able to be happy. So for me, that was really the starting point of my journey. And from there, so for me, my initial entry point into mindfulness was very much from a head perspective, from a thinking and analyzing and lots of reading. And in my 20s, I started on my first retreat, and I realized that it's a practice. It's not just thinking about it. And that was really my journey. And since then, I've had the privilege of being able to connect with many amazing teachers who have helped helped, guided me, and supported me in my journey.
Well, I'm also an engineer by training, a scientist, and we can spend maybe offline many hours about some of those references that talk about these points. And there's a Sanskrit phrase, manasayivanu drashtavyam, which is one should critically see the world through the mind, which is getting exactly what you were saying. But I just want to come back to this issue of compartmentalizing, because I think we know one of the big challenges and prizes of being an authentic mindful leader is not to compartmentalize. I had my aha a number of years ago from a great coach, Eki, we would talk about, I would joke how I had this dark side of being a Sanskrit scholar, and then there was Subhanu, and I would have corporate Subhanu and spiritual Subhanu, and he'd say, why two Subhanus? You know, if you can't bring yourself to work, how can you expect others to bring themselves to work? So I was just wondering, how do you help leaders to not hide parts of who they are and help them really bring their whole self, including that vulnerable side? It's one thing we talked a lot about in the executive teams is how do we bring vulnerability to the discussion? So just your experience of how you help leaders open themselves to that and bring themselves to everything they do.
Yeah, well, I love the question. And I think that a couple of things. I think there's more of us that need to encourage them and make it safe to do that. And I think for you as in your career, it sounds very much like you model that, because I can certainly say that when I growing up in the context and the environment, the fast-paced world of Deloitte, again, an amazing organization, but I certainly was not taught as a young aspiring leader, as I was rising up the ranks within Deloitte, that vulnerability was going to be a strategic strength for me. That was not part of my leadership development. And I really think that we need to have more conversations about this, because we know that when we bring our whole selves to work, it's actually what engages people. We know that if I were to say to you guys, you know, hey, I really need your help, we know, and I'm vulnerable, we know that actually piques your, you know, from a neurological perspective, it draws you in to you. You're closer to me because it makes you feel good that you can actually be useful to me. And yet that is simply not how management development has worked for many years. And so I think what we're really looking at is challenging the old way of developing leaders, the old mantra about, you know, it's like, you got to be tough and, you know, you got to put on a brave face and have that shield. Because one, I don't think that's ever worked well, because it makes us not authentic. But two, what we really saw in our research was the next generation of workers, they don't want that. And they're rejecting that in all kinds of ways. They want to be engaged. They want a human leader that has conversations with them and is real. And I think that for us, helping leaders to be able to see that there's not only a new way of leading, but it's easier for you because it allows you, hey, guess what? You get to be human. You get to be yourself. And that it actually, and then through small ways of showing that by being more authentic, by being more vulnerable, it actually draws people in. You get more engagement from the team. It actually helps you be successful. So I think it's really those two things, but we need more role models like you.
I've often been told by men, oh, it's easier to talk with you, quote, because you're a woman.
Right.
And I don't know whether that's true or not, but that was what they chose to say. And I also know, having been in situations when I was in Exxon in particular, that showing vulnerability was complex as a woman. And I think it would have been different for men. And I know one woman who, because she showed some emotions to a top leader, ended up not having a career path within that company, and yet had an amazing career afterwards elsewhere. But the engineering corporation there couldn't handle that. Yes. So I don't know, what would you say about women and being vulnerable and working as a woman with this kind of work in what still tends to often be a male-run corporate world?
I myself have had the privilege of being able to work with a lot of high potential women leaders. And when we present these topics, the exact question often comes up. And one of the things that I will say is it is definitely different. It is interesting. You mentioned Rasmus, who is my co-author and my partner at Potential Project. We talk about this when he stands up on stage and says, you know, that he's a dad and he has 3 kids, everybody in the audience looks at him and goes, oh, you know, he's this successful man and he's also a father. You know, that's so great. Like, he gets kudos for that. If I stand up and talk about my kids and, you know, being a mother, and I actually, it doesn't help my credibility. In fact, it takes away from my credibility. And we can tell, we've actually experimented this, we can tell the exact same stories. And there are differences, and it is because whether they're conscious or unconscious, we know that there are biases against women as leaders. We know that the studies show that people do not see women in the same way. They expect women to be more nurturing and caring, and men to be more aggressive and be in more leadership roles. So what we really found, and I think that this was the thing that was so inspiring when we talked specifically to women leaders as part of our research, was it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be vulnerable and that you shouldn't be bring more compassion. That was the other thing, is women being compassionate needed to be more strategic necessarily than men being more compassionate, because otherwise it could make them seem weak. That was their perspective. But I think for us, it was around, what do you value though? Do you value bringing your whole self to work? Do you value being a more compassionate, more selfless, more mindful leader? Then be strategic about it. And the key differential, and this was really what I found to be so inspiring, is if I am choosing to share something or not share something about myself, standing up for myself, you know, taking my seat at the table, am I doing it out of fear, or am I doing it because I believe that it's the best thing for the team and for the organization? And for us, it was really that difference between, am I afraid that I won't get recognition? Am I afraid that I won't get recognized? Am I, you know, or is it that I really believe that this is because of my values, this is really going to be the best way for us to be successful as a team, as an organization? But I totally agree with you. It's not fair. And I think for women leaders, we need to definitely recognize those unconscious biases that can make these ideas of being vulnerable and compassionate. We have to be more strategic about it.
We just found one reference to Tonglen meditation on page 155 of the book, which itself is fascinating. And for those listening, Tonglen is essentially means giving and taking, and is a practice to really make compassion second nature. How can one take the transformative power of presence to take a negative energy to a positive for yourself or somebody else? It's practiced a lot by the Dalai Lama. It had its roots in an ancient Rishi Atisha, who wrote one of the earliest treatises on mind training. Bodhipatha Pradipa was the name. And you may be aware, in Indonesia, it's a very widespread practice. You mentioned it, but then somehow got shy and didn't talk more about these influences in the book. And if we were to say bringing one's whole self to everything we do, we were just wondering why so shy on some of those ancient sources. You know, I maybe it's the wrong thing, but I'm known for just annoying people by quoting the Sanskrit verse that captures the thought, or an Urdu verse that help bring the thought home.
It always comes back to us. What do we think is going to be most beneficial? And when we look at our audience, so again, looking at, you know, the senior executives, the corporate leaders, for them, you know, knowing where this comes from, where these teachings come from, it could actually detract from their ability to embrace it in a day-to-day life. And so for us, it's always been about, you know, these things, these terms have great meaning for us. Tonglen has incredible, even when you said it, actually, I could feel in my heart. It just means so much to me. But if it's a foreign term and it doesn't mean something, then I'm going to potentially limit my ability to share with you something that could be incredibly valuable, and you may reject it because it's a word that you don't understand and it's not a business term. So one of the things that, well, it's interesting actually, one of the, I guess another little interesting background about the book, and I guess how cautious we are in Potential Project about trying to be skillful and meet people where they are, is that originally the book was just going to be on mindfulness and mindful leadership. And that was actually what Harvard originally asked us to do. And it was really through our research, but also through the interviews, that we kept on hearing from the leaders that we met how critical compassion was for them to be bringing more compassion, even though many of them said, it was interesting, in our survey, 91% of leaders said that compassion was critical to business today, 80% that they wanted to bring more compassion, but they didn't know how, which we thought was just both beautiful and also, that there's opportunity there. So for us, it was really, selflessness was everything that came through from the interviews. And so for us, it's about how can we talk about these practices? How can we talk about Tonglen? How can we talk about these practices in a way that people are going to embrace and are going to welcome and feel it's their own? I mean, it's got to be something that means something for them.
Just to share with you the experience Kathryn and I have, we've been running these sessions at the Academy of Management for a number of years and elsewhere. And Kathryn always asked me to start from a chant from the ancient Vedic texts. We find that rather than people running away, it creates a space and an energy that it takes people out of themselves somehow. And I've been surprised how open most people have been when you talk about where it comes from, but then link it to their world today. So to your point, and some of the research that would be great to do, this notion of being an authentic leader is living a life of purpose, which allows you to bring purpose to your organizations. And we know purpose drives engagement and engagement drives results. So,
Yes.
so and I think we can talk, we talk about some of those ancient sources where this has come from. Just sharing my experiences, people have been generally quite interested. Oh, that's where it's from. That's where it's from. And
I wonder about one slightly different area, which is, I know that you mentioned organizational behavior and you mentioned organization development as the focus of the work. I'm interested in what way you feel that the flavor of what you do is organization development. It seems to be quite training based. My background and what I've been teaching is in organization development, but often I do training too. So to me, the distinction is one, there's a program, it may be adapted and customized, but there's basically, it's programmatic, and organization development is trying to come from what the people there are working on. That's how I would make the distinction and really help them do the work and enter their mindset and the French have a good term for it, problématique. It's not like problem. A problématique is something where you're working with problems, I think, to really shift things and understand better.
Yeah, so I would say that, and to not to put training in a box, but the reason why I wouldn't consider what we do training is because if you think about training being somebody comes in, they get some skills, they get some knowledge, they go out and apply them. That is not what we do. The reason being is that we believe that, and we really are looking at making cultural change. We really believe, as I started up front, is that if these tools and techniques are done in isolation, they're not going to be able to have the best benefit. And honestly, they won't be sustained within an organization. So our work is really looking at from a systems perspective to say, okay, so if we talk about how to be more mindful in meetings, go try it now. Like go actually, and what's, so in our programs, it's really experiential. What's challenging for you, or what are opportunities for you in your workplace. And now how can you actually take these practices that we talk about in a classroom setting? So that's really the vehicle that we use, but then to be able to bring them to life in their everyday organization. So that's really the organizational change component. In addition to that, we know that we are social beings. We know that whether we like it or not, we're so influenced by what everybody else is doing. And so for us, one of the things that we've been passionate about at Potential Project is that we know that there are many individuals that themselves might take on these mind training practices, but we know at Sangha, to use that word, community is so important. And so what we are trying to do within the organizations that we partner with, and in partnership, of course, with them, is actually make being more present with each other, being more others focused, being more compassionate, actually integrated into the fabric of the organization culture. And so that's why it really is a culture change. There's the classroom that's a vehicle for that, but we're constantly talking about what else can you do to be able to actually influence and change and support the culture actually rising up to these values and these ideals.
So if I put my corporate hat back on again, often in business, we want to measure outcomes.
Yes.
The result. So what guidance would you give people in terms of measuring outcomes versus just investing in the journey?
We are very focused on measures. I think that it's, when you're working in organizations, you have to be respectful of that there's an investment being made, and there has to be some way of determining whether there was a return on that investment, whatever it is that you feel that's important. So every single program that we run, we always have pre and post surveys as a minimum. In addition to that, what we love to be able to do is, when we're working, what are some of the business outcomes? Like, is it engagement scores? Or when we work with sales teams, is it actually looking at whether the sales numbers go up? Like, can we actually draw any link between people being more present with a potential client, that it actually enhances their ability to be able to generate a sale? And the research that we've done says yes. So we are always looking for standardized outcomes that we have in our standardized surveys in addition. And also, especially with some of the biofeedback, give actually people. It's a really interesting to be able to give feedback to ourselves. We know that so many people love having these devices or whatever else. So I love your question. And I think that's why what I said earlier, every program we run needs to be focused on what are the outcomes and how are we going to measure this?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because the flip side is I often share with people that the journey is the destination in many ways, and how do you just delight in the path you're on, and let the universe unfold, but at the same time in a corporate context you need to have some idea where you're heading. So how do you have those flag posts in the ground? And I find purpose and engagement as great ways of lifting and uniting an organization and talking about the kind of leaders we want that ignite those in others.
Yes.
Which is what these practices help bring about.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I think, engagement scores are a fantastic one, or, 360 reviews, or, because I think it's, the journey. I totally agree with you. The journey is the destination. But how do we know how we're doing on the journey if we don't have some way of being able to say what's important to us and how do we measure whether we're succeeding in that? And so I think to me, measurement is we don't shy away from it. In fact, we really embrace it, and we look for every opportunity we can to be able to help us without being attached to it. I think that there can be too much to be fixated on in terms of the outcomes. But the other thing that I would say from a corporate perspective is that I think that we also find, like, one of our big clients, actually, when they originally were interested in bringing us in, they said, we said, why do you want to bring mindfulness into your organization? They said, well, because we've heard it's really a good thing and we want to bring more mindfulness. And we said, well, but what are the business outcomes? Like, what is it actually going to help you achieve better? And they said, well, be more mindful. Well, tell us more. Like, for us, because if it's not tied to something that's valuable to be, maybe it's engagement, or maybe it's productivity, or maybe, but there has to be something. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to necessarily measure it in the right way, but it's not going to be valued. It's going to be a nice to have as opposed to what we're looking for. We want these to be strategic need to have because they help you deliver results. So for us, those are the kinds of conversations that we really push our clients. And we really want to have. So your question, ROI, is very, very important to us.
I am curious because, and I know that both of you are aware, there's been a lot of discussion in the press of people, among people who are really deeply interested in awareness practices and creating a culture of meaning, both in organizations and in the world. My books have been lately about creating a healthier world, and that's a pretty big task. I see it as a kind of the razor's edge, a difficult path to be working with awareness and wanting people to be living the life they want to live, and doing that in the environment that often pushes them almost over the edge, but not quite. And so that dance between their own inner values, and I think we hear this as being a question from millennials, but for me it goes back to earlier periods, that I think many people who are more mature have similar values, even if millennials don't know it, about what is life really about and what's life really for. So how do you dance with that? The question, the paradox of needing to deliver results and wanting people to want to be engaged with their work, and also living their true selves and from their values, because they don't always really fit together.
I think that it does get down to, what do we know fundamentally makes us happy? And one of the things that we know, and I think you already talked about it, we know that human beings want to feel like we matter. We are social beings. We don't want to be kicked out of the tribe. I mean, it's the worst thing that you can do to somebody, is say, you don't add value to this organization, because that triggers all of our social responses of saying that we don't add value. So I think that for us, helping leaders and individuals recognize that feeling a sense of purpose, and it doesn't matter whether you're cleaning the floors, but you know that cleaning the floors is actually incredibly valuable, so people don't trip and they have clean floors, so that the organization is a safer and healthier place. And I think that in our busyness, in our day-to-day busyness, and I think that this is really what we see again and again, in our day-to-day busyness, we've lost that ability to be able to help people see the value and purpose. We've lost a sense of gratitude. We've lost, I think, one of the things that we talk about in the book, with the incredible differences that we have right now between CEO pay versus frontline pay. There's a value, there's objective value that we don't value people that are frontline serving the customers as much as we value the top senior executives, which we think might be a little bit skewed. And I think that what it comes down to for individuals, like you asked specifically about individuals, it's about, for me, I know that when I show up as my best self, when I do my best, when I feel like I'm contributing, when I'm doing things that are meaningful, and that can be whether it's, like I said, if I have to sweep the floors, but I know that that's achieving a higher purpose from the science and also from my own personal experience. I think that we know that actually enables people to feel connected and people to feel purpose and have more meaning. But it's difficult because I think there's so many things in our environment that actually push us in the opposite direction. We know that certainly materialism and a lot of the other challenges that we have in our geopolitical systems that are pointing out more differences as opposed to bringing us more closer together in terms of social cohesion. So I think there's a lot of things that are pulling us in opposite directions, but fundamentally, we are all the same in terms of what makes us happy. We were looking to feel valued and feel that we can take care of ourselves and our family and our community.
What I found interesting, Jacqueline, is many of these elements are right there in front of us, and we just somehow fail to recognize. So I'll give you a very clear example. Many people get to a certain point in their career by seeing as decisive, judgmental, they react, they do things. When you start recruiting a board, as I've done, and various boards for investee companies that we've invested in, you're looking for board members who are curious, who will ask purposeful, probing questions, who listen first, who don't bring their ego into the room. The word in Sanskrit for a wise person is Shrutavan, one who listens well. And suddenly we're asking of a different skill set. And it's like, well, why didn't we inculcate those earlier? And we all know that the person that's always giving the chip shot in the room, ultimately, their days are numbered. But the thoughtful executive that really asks the questions that get to the heart of the matter, people gravitate to those. So I think that the onus is a lot on us, whether it's academic practitioners or coaches or leaders, to really identify and build those skills in leaders at a very early age, and promote there's this whole adage, promote the doers. And I always say, promote the doers who do it in the right way. It's and so it's not just what you say or do, but how you do it. And so I think that's one of the challenges and opportunities we have in terms of equipping a new generation of leaders. And with that, I just had one final question, and then we'll turn over to Kathryn, is, if you think about those who may be listening, where you may have the skeptics, the curious, and those who are just waiting for some meaning, what final thoughts would you share with them to take their first step on this journey?
I think that for me, what I loved, I actually would summarize kind of what you said, is I think that so many of these things are front and center and they're obvious to us. Like when we talk to people about, you know, do you want to feel valued? Everybody says yes. You know, would you like a boss that was, you know, had a steel plating coating of armor, or would you like somebody who was actually human? Well, of course we'd want somebody that's human. You know, I think that so many of these things, and I think that's why one of the things, the way that we summarize the book oftentimes when we're talking about it, is a quote actually from one of the CEOs that we interviewed, Javier Cadville from Audi Volkswagen. And he basically said that after we had talked to him about this, he said, you know, I really think that what you guys are saying, and I think it's really true from my own experience, that leadership today is about unlearning management and relearning being human. And that's kind of it, right? I mean, it's not that hard. It's accessible. And that's the thing, you know, when we do our workshops around this, people say, wow, you know, I thought it was going to be something really complicated that was going to be difficult for me to do. But what you basically said is, I can do this. I actually have the tools to be able to show up. And it's hard. It's not easy, but it's accessible. And I think that for us, it's really putting value on the things that we all naturally want to do, can do, and actually know are the right things to do. But they haven't been the way that we've been brought up as leaders. They haven't been the way that organizations are viewed. And we need to change that. And I would say maybe one final thing is, again, for those of you who are listening, thank you so much. Be a part of this movement. Be a role model. Get started. Believe in yourself. Believe that being a more authentic, vulnerable, selfless, compassionate, mindful leader actually will help you. And I hope that it will reward you. And if not, maybe it's not the right organization for you, and join with others. There's a really broad movement of other people that believe in this. So let's stick together.
Well, I think we should probably close with that impassioned invitation to all of you who are out here listening. And thank you so much, Jacqueline, and thank you, Subhanu, for joining us. And I look forward to more conversations with both of you. And it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It was really great to connect today.